So this has never happened before, in my memory. Correct me if I'm wrong. But never before has the video which has won the comment response, because it's had the most comments, and that is literally how I decide which video will get the comment response video from the previous week. It's which one has the most comments. Has been the sci-fi cruiser video. I wasn't expecting this, but the Deadalus class generated a fairly prodigious amount of comments, nearly 80, including a fair number from myself, but still more than pretty much everyone else every other video produced. And when I say comments, I mean it definitely generated more in terms of depth of comment than everyone else produced, which was interesting and fun, and is going to present me with absolutely no problems at all when it comes to answering the comments and trying to answer them properly. There is a whole discussion in this which will go on throughout and probably cause a lot of comments to respond to. And I have to say, its closest contender in number of comments was actually the comment response video itself for Epic Blunders. And it was sort of a case of going, oh good lord, is that going to be the comment response video? Is it going to be a comment response on a comment response video? That could be interesting. I've never done that before. And then I went, no, the Deadalus class has won. Oh. Okay, so Admiral Tiberius, we will start with you. Ooh, this is going to be fantastic. Absolutely love these ships. I was so happy when Eagle Moss put a 304 display model for sale. I have heard about this model. I have. And I have tried to hunt this model because I too like this particular design. However, I have so far not found one, let's put it this way, that is of decent quality, that is below £150. And as much as I love it, I am half Cornish and half Scottish in my family background. Not in accent, but in my family background. And I must admit, my entire insides rebel at the idea of that. What I would normally then do is hunt some sort of airfix model, etc., which I could build. I haven't yet found one of those which is decent in quality. So I am going to not have to make do without having one of these vessels, but I would dearly love one at some point if anyone spots a decent one going at a reasonable price. Because I think I could torture my students for hours. I mean, when I say torture, I mean educate my students for hours with a model. Before anyone asks, yes, I do have model aircraft carriers and cruisers, and a case which I take them in to work with me occasionally. You have to keep them safe. Although the last time I took the submarine in, it lost this little hatch it had over its reactor core. I'm not sure which student took it, but I have an idea. Leaving that to one side. They are lovely ships. Shame the franchise is basically dead, so unfortunately we'll never see any evolution of the class. Say a dedicated battleship version with giant rail guns and super Asgard beam weapons. I'm always hopeful for Stargate to come back. It was one of the better sci-fis of the 90s and the noughties. And when I say better sci-fis of the 90s and noughties, there was a good, rich period of some very good sci-fi, which has led to some of the sci-fi we have today. Although I have to say that sci-fi alternates between being either so serious and realistic that, frankly, I spend my entire time in professional mode, almost analysing it like I would real-world events, and therefore can't switch off, or it's so fantastical I don't have any semblance of belief. This is just my personal complaint. This is one of the reasons why I liked Stargate so much, because it was just the right level that I could believe it, but not so serious that I was constantly going, but he would do that, and that, and that in my head, and sometimes out loud. Marcus Fransonium, making mistakes is human. To muck things up completely, one uses a computer. There is that old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. Duke of Pretchington, utilitarian designs, much like the UNC's vessels in Halo. Yes, and I do have a little announcement for that. If you're interested in sci-fi, you're going to want to look out for the Marathon Cruiser video. Whenever I was doing research on the Marathon Cruisers online, and I have to admit offline wasn't exactly brilliant, but online was better than not. Online was even stranger. The fact is, what I found most online was to do with Halo's heavy cruisers. And whilst I've done some videos about Halo before, etc., I felt I would include a little bit as a bonus in the Marathon class about the Marathon class heavy cruiser and why they are done wrong by the Autumn class and why they are pretty despite their funny shape and why they should have built more and maybe fitted them with a ram. I have to admit the last bit is just me winding you up, but you know. They could have done with a ram. It wouldn't have been very good. It would have been very short service, but it would have been interesting. Darsharatsky. I always assumed the 16 missiles in there. It was meant to be 16 VLS clusters like you see on the bow of a Tico or a Burke DD. So if the Burke has 48 missiles on the bow launchers, multiply this by 16, and the ship is a flying missile silo complex and makes the scene of a 304 spamming missiles on a Wraith Hive strip as soon as they drop out of hyperspace to stop the Hive from reaching our galaxy. And Kossurf, the Aurora-class ship that was recovered and had to finish repairs, all those squares on the neck of 304 look like VLS cells to me. My response to that was, but there again, think how big the missiles need to be to go the distances they need to go. Even in space, it's going to be pretty big, bigger than a Mark 41 would hold. My view is that this is something which makes sense to the writers, who may or not have been have asked any technical advisor. But the reality, if built, would probably be 24 quad clusters, able to reload from below, each missile being probably I've managed to repeat being probably twice, 15 meters long and diameter of roughly a meter in my mind. That would be what it would be. First generation space missiles are roughly that in my mind. I think we have a scene or two where the D fires all tubes on the Wraith Hive ship and we can count the missile trails. It's a bit interesting. Pioneer 11. Can missiles, and I do realise Pioneer 11, that I think you're the physicist who was talking about various things. Pioneer 11. The missiles with conventional fuel don't make much sense anyway. Ships in the Stargate are clearly capable of massive acceleration, high tens of Gs at least, and maintaining acceleration for a long time. For solid fuel rockets, Shilokovsky, I will never be as good at that. I did aerospace, and I teach aerospace engineering and history of it, and I did astrophysics as my elected extra in A-level physics, and then kept it up every chance I could get with modules, options, and auditing modules through my bachelor's, and even to extent in my master's, and I still cannot get that name correct. Rocket equation gets ridiculous for more than a 5 or 6 kilometers of delta V, potential change in velocity, which would give them maybe 10 seconds of that acceleration. So basically, anything they fired at could just run away and be completely safe. This is the interesting thing, because the missiles we see look rocket-powered. But then we look at things like the 304, and I think it's is it the 304 or is it the 302? 302, isn't it, fighters? Yeah. And we sort of look at their engines, and they have an Aquila-powered hyperspace window generator. They have 2 jet propulsion engines, 2 aerospike boosters, and a rocket booster. Now, they do a lot of high-G space maneuvers with those. But the more and more I look at these ships, and the more and more I think about these sort of things, and the Deadalus class themselves, I'm surprised that the sublight drive, which they have in their system, has not been adapted to missiles, as well as the F302s. It would seem more sensible to me. So that is a little bit of a logical inconsistency going on there. If you have, and I think those are sort of the engines you can see back there are the sublight engines. If you have that technology, it would seem sensible to fit it to a missile. But there again, it could just be so expensive that they still are getting used to and miniaturizing it, and that's as small as they can make it. I'm not sure. But it's an interesting thing to think about. Right now, then we start off with Carl Aswell's comment. While not knowing how the magical 18 as a minimum cap came up, it's not a magical number. I KVG sometimes. As a minimum naval cap needs to think more or less only in 2D. You have maximum height of threats. On a 3D environment, however, your high cap cannot dive on sea-level torpedo bombers, sea-skimming cruise missiles. That's not really what a cap... Let's put it this way. You're thinking about getting high and dropping down as your sort of cap, and we don't really orientate caps that way. Also, let's read my response. It wasn't a magical number. It was found in Mediterranean and the Pacific, shown again in Korea and another conflict since. Hence, the original Invincible class air group was 18 Harriers and 24 Sea King. Minimum air group to sustain a cap was 18 aircraft, and again, you are thinking of aircraft in presuming they're diving. There is no up or down in space, so the cap will probably be posted on the likeliest threat axis. Remember, this is a battlecruiser, not a carrier. The fighters are there to provide early warning, strike dilution, and strike. They are not there to achieve a total knockout. If you were going for a cap in space and you were trying to maintain air defense around the force, you'd be needing a lot more than 18 aircraft. 18 aircraft allows you to maintain 2 pairs guaranteed in space at any time, and 2 more on alert. And as I said, I would prefer this ship to have 32 to 36. And if it did have 32, it could probably maintain 8 in space and 8 on alert. So it could be maintaining 4 two-plane caps. Probably 2 close. 1 pair up the primary threat axis, and 2 at the... And this is where I'm going to sound strange. Primary threat axis, providing it's not forward or sideways, it's not forward or backwards, would probably be sort of angled off to somewhere, and that'd be where I put some fighters. Have other fighters orbiting close to the carrier, probably to the shit they're coming from, probably keep sticking to the off threat axis side so they can cover from a rear attack, and then I'd have the other fighters procure 2 sitting behind my maneuver and 2 sitting in the front of where I'm heading. So that's how I'd probably do it with that number of aircraft. Well, that number of fighter craft. But it is a question. At a certain point, you do start. If you're starting looking at it, you're starting turning it into a carrier, and it's not a carrier; it's a battle cruiser. And there are some interesting points about it maybe being a bomber rather than a battle cruiser, and I'll get into that in a point. But it's a battle cruiser, and my response was hence. Calvin Goswick, I guess minimum cap is a pair. There are 4 major axes on Earth's major oceans, but at least 6 in space, so I guess we are more miscommunicating than disagreement. Yes, well, probably, as I said, you can cover, if you have 18, you can cover 2 of those axes. So you could put 2 forward and 2 on your primary threat axis. So you don't blunder into anything, like a trap, and a likely line of target from the enemy is going to get spotted. So that gives you more time to deal with anything coming from those axes, but also allows your own onboard teams to focus on those areas, but also pay a little bit more attention to the other areas as well, because they've got this forward observation. Is hence 2 pairs of space. Isn't it 2 pairs over the sea in, say, a 30-degree cone, more probably a circular sector, towards the threat axis, which is a true 3D environment would be 3 pairs plus in truth. If so, a minimum 18 craft for service cap would need to be around 24 in a starfighter patrol. It's not really. Because the ship can also maneuver in those 6 axes. This is the thing. One of the problems for an aircraft carrier is it can move in its own sort of this direction. Fast, if it wants to, but it can turn, it can go forward, it can slow down, but that's it. In space, the spaceship, as well as the fighters, can move in all sorts of axes. So you can get away with less, especially when you realise this is a battle cruiser. Pioneer 11. Early warning will be irrelevant in a space environment. Admittedly, I'm arguing science on a sci-fi, but presumably you take all science not too explicitly broken by Stargate to be accurate. Stealth in space is impossible, bar Stargate's close, which a cat will not work against. Why won't they work against? Even a cloaked ship can't go through an area. A cloaked ship only works at a certain distance. If you consider even the ancient cloaks, when the Wraith Hive had enough power, could see it through it. So even cloaking, kind of like stealth, only works so far. The closer the source or the sensor, the more likely you are to pick it. So you're narrowing down their axes of approach, even if they're in a cloaked vessel. Anything capable of supporting human life lights up like a Christmas tree against the background of space, as it's a temperature of around 290 Kelvin against the 3 Kelvin of space, and there is effectively no clutter. Now, that one of the first things I learned about astrophysics was that space was actually, whilst it was empty, it was also noisy. There are also quite a few environments where it's not the case. You're thinking about intergalactic space, my response. I'm thinking of fights defending planets involving slingshots around moons and dodging in asteroids. The reality is, with the speeds possible in this universe, and that's the Stargate universe, even without engaging hyperdrives, an early warning tripwire positioned to look around the horizons and take action would be really useful, as will probably microsatellites and other disposable systems. The reality is, you cannot... Positioning your fleet to always fight in open space is kind of like positioning your fleet to only fight in open oceans. That's great in theory. In practice, the Falklands War happens, and then you have a lot of trouble. And that's against a near-peer, not even a peer threat. And we've got to presume any opponents in space, can we presume they're going to be near-peers? So we've got to search for every advantage in every possible circumstance we can get. Especially in the case of these ships, which are often deployed solo. This is another problem I have with the whole Daedalus class, apart from its numbers, is that they're deployed solo. And running backwards and forwards to Atlantis, I can sort of understand why you'd have a ship doing that solo, but it is going to be a long way unsupported. But having fighters, etc., does ameliorate the issues to an extent. Pioneer 11. Stargate plus Daedalus Clarke equals small. Good. Early predictions. Good general design. Should be either a specialised carrier or a specialised battleship. Is a battleship not a battlecruiser? Stafford Thompson. No, they're battlecruisers for sure. Needs way more firepower and armour and shields for them to be battleships. That's the point. Pioneer. They're designed to go toe-to-toe the biggest and meanest ships of the past. Therefore, they are battleships. They're not really designed to go toe-to-toe. Yes, they can go toe-to-toe, and this is certainly the case once they are fitted with Asgard beam weapons, but that's thanks to a technological advantage. Actually being designed to go toe-to-toe, versus being designed to provide a rapid strike capability is a different matter. I think, in the nicest way, if you are building something to defend Earth like a battleship, I would be deleting the space and money I'm spending on the hyperdrive. Well, how to put this, the maximal powered hyperdrive. I'd probably be tempted to just build something which has a lot of armor and shielding, and a lot more weapons. The thing is, we can call it a battlecruiser, but in this era, this period, this sort of scenario, there are no battleships, there are no cruisers, so you can call it whatever you want. It's a one-stop shop to fits all. It does the cruiser role, it does the battle role, it does everything. And that's more a universe problem than a ship problem. Also, I'm not sure what my firepower you could give them. Their shields are pretty incredible. And once equipped with Asgard beam weapons, they've got the most firepower of anything in the Stargate universe, possibly bar an O'Neill, all of which are destroyed at the same time. O'Neill, of course, being the Asgard ships. And I do see your point, but just because a ship is powerful doesn't make it a battleship. Which is going to sound strange, but let me explain. A battleship is built and focused primarily on fighting battles. They very rarely wander around much in peacetime. If you consider the history outside 1920s and 30s, they are ship's line for much of their period, and in many ways I would compare this more to ship's line sort of philosophy than anything. I would say, if I was going to call this anything and put this in any scenario, they're not a first rate. So I would say they sort of bandy to pass between a third rate and a fourth rate in a sort of design and philosophy. In that, a group of them can take on a first rate, i.e. a super hive, and they never took on the largest of the Hattaks. They were taken on by, well, mostly they were destroyed by internal means. So we never got to see them take on really what is a first-rate warship of the era. Well, we did when a couple of them tried to take on a super hive, and it really wasn't good. So I'm more comfortable calling them battlecruisers than I am battleships, because I think to be a battleship, they need to be designed with that in mind, which again would change how you design them. Their rolling also is far more fits the profile and duties of a cruiser, and they do have significant combat capabilities, which is why I'm comfortable with the phrase battlecruiser for them. You are right, they are more powerful than most other ships in the era, but there again, so are battlecruisers. Let's be honest. Is there a single cruiser, or even some capital ships, which would really want to have taken on HMS Hood? In the 1920s? There's pretty much no one who would like to take on HMS Hood. She was fast enough, as these ships are, to get away if she didn't want to engage. She wanted to destroy. It's a dark time. I don't have any brew, only Coke. So if I am tougher than I normally am, that's why. Blame it on me having to drink the black liquid. Come Gasberg, at around 23 minutes, no shuttle helicopter, not to mention that you might want to insert extract people or even cargo from longer range that your transporter rings or transporters can reach. I think I mentioned that further along because I was tying into the wider crew numbers discussion. I think you could solve the problem of ship's boats by employing some guard cargo ships, if using the larger hangar bays, but it does seem that this wasn't demonstrated in show. The cargo ships seem to be fairly ubiquitous, to the point that lots of people who aren't system lords are using to lug cargo around the Milky Way and appear to be cheap and somewhat hyperspace capable. So you can probably get a nearby go to a nearby planet with a gate and to ask for help if in a solar system and something goes wrong. Yes, they are fairly capable, but again, that was always rather a strange gap, because everyone else has these sorts of ships. The Tok'ra has them. The Stargate teams themselves capture them and use them a fair number of times. And yet, at no point does anyone go, we need an equivalent for our ships. Of course, if being built today, and if the program was being run today, you probably have the fact that the fighters, the 302s, could operate in a sort of uncrewed state to an extent. They could be flown by one, could have two, or could be sort of, to an extent, uncrewed. Would probably be alternatingly, would probably be optionally crewed. And you probably would have more of them, because they'd probably be going for the cool and have some limpet themselves onto the ceiling or something like that. And have a gravity field around the hangar, so you could work on them upside down up there or right way up down here, and it would just be wonderful, and you could carry even more. Go back. Crew number issue could be because Stargate is under the Air Force, and while Air Forces do know about operating in 3D, they don't know about long deployments far away from bases like Navies do, hence no Marines or not enough crew for multiple watches. Then Hanspark replied, but the other branches are involved enough that I'm shocked it never came up. The Department of Navy is going to send Marine teams through the gate, but they won't step up and tell the Air Force their design concept is impractical. Odds are pretty good the budget for these projects is split between all the branches to make hiding the costs easier, and to keep the Army or Navy from asking why the Air Force budget gets to be $11 bazillion and theirs aren't. Yes, and that makes it even stranger to crew. The fact that the Navy should probably be involved. I think some things are done for simplicity, but I also think in the nicest way there is some stuff which is done because no one asked the real question. And someone did come up with the idea that it was because of, and I'll get into the point, that because they were trying to be secret. We've already got thousands of people involved. You've already had attacks on the Earth when this has happened. The fact is, what goes on in militaries almost every day is fairly routinely kept secret, just for operational reasons. And when I say secret, I mean if there's a Type 23 frigate off the coast of the UK currently pinging around hunting for a Russian submarine, which it might think might be there for intelligence, and might be somewhere near some cables, that won't be on the television, that won't be being talked about, that won't be anywhere in the news, because you don't want to advertise that you're trying to hunt it. Because they'll tell it that it's being hunted. So, whilst I don't think... The thing I usually find is that for legitimate reasons like that, you will find, as a rule, the military as a group and a body are very able to keep their mouths closed and not talk. This is despite recent issues with, I think it was Snapchat and a French frigate, but we'll leave that to one side. You also tend to find that the reason they keep their mouth shut is their sense of honour, etc. Which is why when things get problematic, you often do get the noise coming out. Okay, maybe it doesn't go straight to the press or something like that, but often it's only one step away. So yeah, in this scenario, I think especially understanding the recent attacks, etc. I think they would be keeping. I think they would find it quite easy to keep a large crew and the requirements of that quieter. Colonel Goswood. Railgun ammo. Given that the railgun slugs are inert, I would keep all 9 18 magazines around the individual turret, reviving the emotional support, i.e. armour, of protect cruisers' coal bunkers. Gives some chance to resist or at least survive a direct hit on the weapon station. there are a few problems with this. I'm going to go through the ones I put on the chat, on comment response first, but then I'm going to go into the others. Sounds lovely, but what happens if you need to reload your forward guns from Alpha? It's far easier to have a central magazine and production space. If you have all the ammunition from the guns, it actually makes logistics supply adaptation to circumstances a lot more difficult, whereas a part-distributed, part-centralized system gives you flexibility and understanding. But what happens if you need to reload your forward guns from the Alpha? That would mean 3 hours of continuous fire. Same thing to move a mag or two forward. Time, yes, but not really something you want to do, especially when under those circumstances. You probably want personnel focusing on damage control, and when due to the needs of the F-302s, you'd have to have such a central magazine anyway. Basically, you've got to have... If the sensible thing especially for railguns, is you do have that central magazine, and which has about 50% of your ammunition, and you have your production facilities. Now, I was actually quite intrigued, so I went back and did some more work, working through various scenarios of having the magazines around the turret. This interested me, right up until I got through thinking, well, hang on, when you've expended the ammunition, you're in trouble. Because you lose your armor and protection, and they're still a target, and they're firing, so they're making themselves a target, and the more they fire, the more they are a target. Look, I would love to have infinite space in these ships, but I don't think you're going to. I also think that any command control turret, you're going to want to have space in it. The firing turret, especially, space in it to maintain and repair it. Especially as you want to minimize needing to do things like spacewalks, etc. Because when you do have to do a spacewalk, you have to suit up and all those sort of things. Anything you can do that can minimize having to go through that process, and probably having to drop out of hyperdrive hyperspace in order to do it. I know there are some theories about doing it during hyperspace, but you'd probably prefer to drop out of hyperspace for it. You're going to want to do. So you're not going to want that to be a cluttered turret space. And yes, you can go, well, you know, we've got several hundred meters of ship to play with, surely we can make a turret big enough, but everything you do which makes the turret bigger will also make it a bigger target. And so, no. It's a nice idea though. But I think it's better to have a distribution system and be able to move the stuff automated. I would go for a Queen Elizabeth class style delivery of ammunition all around the ship. Minimises people. And of course, I could have mentioned the Queen Elizabeth class as an example of a ship which we could consider the crew of. And I specifically didn't. Now, I didn't because the Queen Elizabeth class, well, if we consider the personnel numbers, and specifically what they carry, they have 679 crew. This does include air element. And they can carry between 250 and 900 troops. And then you need the element, well, quite often you can end up with a crew of not far off once you have 300 odd Marines aboard and the various other personnel you need for the air group, which is 40 aircraft in total, of roughly 1,600. So yes, this doesn't have the troops aboard it. It should have. It doesn't have the same number of aircraft, but it has a lot more guns, and it is requiring to be a higher level of self-sufficiency because HMS Queen Elizabeth goes around the world. She operates with a task group. She'll have a supply ship with her, a couple of them probably. She'll have a destroyer with her, some frigates. She'll be able to drop into ports. All things which this space vessel won't be able to do. Which is going to mean you require more people. because you need to have those skills with you. Now, Pioneer 11. I think the cap point is pretty irrelevant. While I'm sure your figures for maintaining cap are accurate, the Deadalus class have hyperdrives. It's pretty heavily implied that it's not possible to intercept a ship in hyperspace, and even if it was, the Deadalus was the fastest things in the Stargate universe bar the Asgard, who are on their side, so if an enemy ship appears, they can just go into hyperspace. The only exception I can think is defending an objective. However, the presence of transporters means that people can be recovered instantly, only a certain number of time at a time, and as long as there's no jamming, of course. And SGC doesn't have much to defend other than Earth and Atlantis, both of which have fighters of their own, with Earth also having Daedalus permanently assigned to it. Well, here was my response. But what happens if you can't run? If you're defending an allied planet, you can't run. If you're defending one of your own installations, you can't run. If you're covering an ongoing operation, you can't run. I forgot to add in, if you're damaged, you can't run and repairing yourself. I agree they can pretty much outrun everything they can't fight, but the trouble is you cannot always run. As a warship, a representation of a power, you more often than not will have to stand and fight. Sometimes just for the honour of the flag, which is a terrible thing to think about, but sometimes you need to do that for the sake of the wider war effort. There are also, of course, technologies exist that which can impact hyperdrive travel. Now, whilst they have currently only been used against the Wraith, a presumption that it would say so is not a sensible position when it's considered just how few of these ships Earth has. Pioneer 11, that's a fair point, although at the time they're commissioning the Deadalus class, they cannot go toe-to-toe with Wraith ships and don't know about the Ori. It could fight Gwald ships, but only one or two, considering that the Gwald ships, and this is their standard Hattacks, not the supersized Hattacks, that the Gwald ships tend to move in large squadrons. That makes the ability to hold ground against only one or two of questionable value. Of course, all that changes when they get Asgard power cores and beam weapons, but that couldn't have been predicted at the time of construction. Pegasus' Asgard anti-hyperstech take also comes as a shock to the Tauri. Yes. As this after the Asgard gave humanity all their tech, this heavily implies that the rest of the Asgard didn't know about it either. Well, it was Azurian tech, not Lantean tech, not Asgardian. Also, if they did, why didn't they use it against the replicators? So it likely wasn't a consideration when Daedalus was designed. Well, the tech, it might not be a consideration when it's designed, but it's a consideration when it's operated. And they could adapt them a bit, you know. Those hangars do sit on the outside of the ship. It might not be the easiest thing in the world to extend them, but a little bit of effort. Well, the tech for the hyperspace blocker was Lantean, not Asgardian, so that's its origins, but really I decided early on, this is one of those occasions that if it had been built by a military rather than a TV studio, it would have had 24 to 32 fighters, as it wasn't. It had 8 to 16 and no shuttles. It's just things that don't add up in real life. The CAP CSP makes even more sense when considering the multi-dimensional reality of space combat in space. Also, attackers might well be uncrewed assets, i.e. missiles, in which case having something forward to engage and destroy before they acquire the target lock is probably going to be more effective. Pioneer 11. I hadn't watched the whole video when writing my first couple of comments, and it quickly became clear to me that you were considering the vessels on a level of realism significantly greater than what I was going for. I'm a Master of Physics student, so to me these are extremely unrealistic designs, whereas from your perspective as a naval historian, you clearly consider design, if not the specs associated with it, far more realistic. Yes and no, okay? There are issues. As said, I have a background which also includes physics, engineering, astrophysics, lots of fun things which I take because I'm geeky and I love doing them. I chose history over engineering as my degree because I wanted to figure out how the most complicated system in the world worked. That's of course humanity and society. So I tend to approach analysing humans and human society as if they're machines. Not all is functioning well, but sometimes they're functioning still despite having problems, and sometimes they function better that way than they do if they're perfect, because sometimes a perfect machine isn't perfect. Interesting point to think about. Now, looking at these ships from the point of realism is, once you accept hyperdrives on the other systems, you have to start thinking, okay, let's say, if I'm doing a proper analysis of this ship, or like I do with any sci-fi, I have to accept to a certain extent that they work. That the science, etc. works, that these ships work. Then I have to look at their roles, what they do, and compare those to what they would probably need and their Earth equivalents to try and get some frame of reference. So basically, I'm analysing them as if they are another ship. That is the point of it. If I try and treat them as something special, different, then I'm not keeping in spirit of the channel. So I'm analysing them as if they are another ship. Just another warship I'm looking at. And sometimes it produces good stuff, sometimes it produces interesting stuff. Sometimes it really makes me feel a bit mentally insane. But ultimately, this, especially in this alternate scaling, starts to make sense to me. It starts to make sense to me at that point. The Big Brzezinski. The SCV white base from the mobile suit Gunham might be an interesting cruise example. During the 1-year war between the Principality of Zion and the Earth Federation forces, it ended up spending most of its time as a distraction. Zion was an aristocratic breakaway nation full of very ambitious commanders, and the EFF's shiny new carrier, its prototype mobile suits, was a heck of a bone for them to fight over. The EFF white base and its mobile suits were written off dividends of a development project that had already moved on, crewed mostly by volunteer civilians and refugees after most of the original crew was killed, so the EFF was perfectly happy to let them chase all over and above creation, trying to win a brass ring instead of a war. I figure it's a cruiser based on two things. First, they call an SCV, which probably means either Space Cruiser Vola or Strike Cruiser Vola. The second is that the white base is SSTO capable. It can fly on Earth and to orbit under its own power without external booster stages, something other EFF Navy ships can't do. So you have a ship that can operate anywhere, armed with mobile suits that can function as walking tanks on the ground and fighters in space. Sounds like cruising capability to me. Just the thing you need to fly the flag around a bunch of orbital colonies filled with second and third generation space noids in wartime. I'm going to have to look that up, because that sounds interesting. Sounds interesting. Dishbach. The best science fiction, no matter how soft or even bordering on fantastic, is grounded in the harsh realities of human nature and human social dynamics. Not familiar with Stargate. It sounds like it's a good reflection of us. It is certainly fun. Zacko, isn't Memory Delta a Star Trek wiki? It seems to do Stargate as well for some reason. Zacko. Ah, this makes me smile. They've written Stargate fanfiction in the Star Trek universe. I know. And it has some of the best sources about Stargate ships and etc. going. I just like the fact that geeks like geeky stuff. Just Funk. A few things in that universe are more dangerous than an SG team with C4 and a can-do attitude. Yes. They are cool ships. I would love a good model of it. If I can't have a real one, they would settle for a puddle jumper. Never was sure about the class being battlecruiser, because it was the only class out there would have taken on any role needed, with more of a supporting fleet, including scouting supply vessels, especially if considering maintenance refit on Atlantis, you'd see a more clear distinction. Can even argue battle carrier in space, which makes you wonder about the details of fighter launch. I can't remember if SGC had force fields that could hold out atmosphere. They did. Conceit for the show, I guess. Call something a scanning word battlecruiser. You get the option for fancy outside shots, some fighter action, boarding actions, all that exciting TV stuff. Meanwhile, Carter would be a waste as infantry, even though she and McKay are essentially combat physicists. The same reason writers never sent an APC through the gate. If they do it once, they'd have to do it more often for every crisis. Paul Cameron, for starters, I'll respond to your little comment, which you do as well. I think you can get a 3D model of the ship on Finiverse if you want to 3D print one. What I would say about the lack of APCs, this is another thing, this ship hasn't got an APC. Which makes not having shuttles, although you'd have to have a way to deploy the APC, even stranger. There are some decisions made for this program which really do not make sense. The lack of APCs. Seriously, you could, if you consider how powerful their MP5s often turn out to be versus the Jafar and various fighting Guald, if you turned up with a Bradley fighting vehicle with some Tau missiles, you'd probably wipe them out. You'd run out of rounds for the chain gun before you'd run out of targets, but you would have taken out so many that they would no longer exist. There'd be no fighting force left to fight you. Their entire advantage of the Gwald comes from them usually occupying the high ground in terms of space. They didn't trust their Jafar, they didn't trust any of their forces enough to actually give them decent weaponry. It's one of the funniest things about it and their biggest problem. And I often do find it strange, the combat physicists. I can understand for a Stargate reconnaissance team, you would need people with that sort of level of training. But there again, I have, in my life, managed to meet a fair number of people who were very highly educated and wear uniforms. So to me, that always seemed less of a surprise than perhaps to other people who have this idea that people who are highly educated aren't in the military and military aren't highly educated. In my experience, there often are very many in the military who do have very advanced degrees and qualifications and a really in-depth understanding of their fields. This is especially true in tech-orientated forces, but those forces tend to be the Air Force and the Navy these days. The Army is getting back there, but let's put it this way, the Army went through a heyday where, frankly, if you wanted anything sorted in the world, you called in the Engineering Corps, the Corps of Army Engineers, or the Artillerymen, because they had to do exhaustive exams and qualifications, and they had to be really good to get their jobs. And it was tough to beat them, and they were really smart. And then it's sort of especially with the introduction of, well, you had to extend the age of sail period to fighting, etc., and the demands of sea, so you had a Navy had examinations anyway, but then it's sort of post the 1890s, and especially post World War One, Navy's become very technologically focused. And the Army always seems to be having a fight between the people who are very technologically focused and the people who are very much... The morale to the numbers is a factor as 10 to 1. And you're sort of going, yes, but I'd prefer to be the person with morale and 10 to 1 superiority numbers. Or alternatively, the one with morale, 10 to 1 superiority numbers, and the heavy artillery support. Just my small two-penny worth. Brian419, great video, Dr. Clarke, thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Omega-class destroyer from Babylon 5 sometimes. Marcus Fransonian, you second that. The trouble is, if I do Babylon 5, I will have to deal with the fact that if I say anything which upsets Jamie, I will be deluged in kangaroo and koala bear, probably, assassins. We'll see. Let's see. George Flannery. Wraith cruisers and I believe O'Neill class of Asgard ships are referred to as battle cruisers from Stargate. Home 1 class Mon Calamari cruisers and Hammerhead cruisers or Republic from Star Wars. MCRN Raptor class fast attack cruisers and Suryo class assault cruisers. The UN doesn't seem to use cruisers from the Expanse. No, that seems to be more a kind of have a capital ship or have a corvette. Which I can understand. Cameron, when you were talking about the Daedalus railguns, all I could think about was the test they did with the Vickers gun when it was being taken out of service with the army, and a team of armourers fired off 5 million rounds. Each team had a gunner, a loader, and someone with a shover to get rid of the casings. It shows you need more people than you think, and the ammunition takes up a lot of space when you can get to useful amounts. Question response. I would go with 2 ships from Babylon 5 and say the Omega class and the Warlock class destroyers. Used more as either cruisers or battle cruisers. The mission role they mostly seem to be on is shown when you first meet John Sheridan. He was command of the ES Agamemnon on a presence cruise around the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, showing the flag and assisting where needed. The Warlock class is a successor to Omega and appears to have taken a similar role. Yep. Captain 61 Games. I love Stargate ships. Cool, so do I. Stafford Thompson. Hello, Stafford. Another thought-provoking class, always, Doctor. Yes, I agree that the stats are conflicting, although the overall premise that she's a battlecruiser shines through all the iterations of her class. A shame more aren't shown, and no hints that the X-305 BB are ever made. The fact that there is a non-canon X-305 out there, which is supposed to be the battleship to their battlecruisers, is an interesting one. I have seen various references of it on websites, but I haven't seen any actual proper details yet. As for questions today, I believe that the Rosinetra from The Expanse fits a traditional cruiser, by frigate definition. I'm currently watching Farscape for the first time in over a decade, so I forgot if they had any, although Moya, Leviathan, also fits, albeit she's a cargo ship. I'd say her baby probably fits a cruiser definition more. I'm currently watching... Babylon 5 fell into destroyer doctrine. I suppose the White Stars could be cruisers in a frigate sense as well. I forget what large ships were classed as in Stormship Troopers, but they're more LHD to me than a cruiser. And although mentioned, we don't really see the cruisers in the cult classic Wing Commander. Really, to my understanding, in popular culture, Starfleet are really the only ones to use the cruiser nomenclature. I do hope I'm wrong in this, and that you garner a list of excellent choices to feature. Feature 1. Generally, I like the BC-304 design, although I am also in your boat as to the changes I would make to them. More launchers, a greater hangar capacity with a wider scope of craft, greater crewing personnel quarters with a surge capacity for life support, systems for emergency evacuation purposes to fill every square foot possible with evacuees of varying alignments. Oh, and devoted as many resources as possible to find more ZPMs, for as many of them as can be built. Take care, best wishes, and hope you and your family are all as well as always. Thank you. Even when you start building ships beyond certain dimensions, you're going to run into the elevate problem. You may have to design sections of ships of that size to be self-contained neighbourhoods rather than parts of one giant building that people have to commute across. It may be more efficient to have more smaller hulls. Acceleration is also a problem for larger ships. More massive objects have more inertia to overcome. Then again, the square cube law might allow larger ships to have more efficient engines and in that way achieve a good power-to-weight ratio. Now about a marine complement. I think it'd be either suicidal or prohibitively expensive to land anything smaller than an entirely military-industrial complex on a planet. Really? So basically it's either full amphibious assault or nothing. This is where you lost me. Anyone sent into a planet's gravity well is basically stuck there. They better be sent with everything they need to win. Well, this is, again, in this universe you do have transporters, you do have rings, and as I said, my suggestion would be to have shuttles, and also you do have Stargate, so it's a different scenario, and it's dealing with the in-universe sensibility. But if you do want to land it, you have Atlantis. Saturn V carried a record-breaking 155 tons to low Earth orbit once. That means one Saturn V rocket, moon intercept vehicle, requiring cryogenic fuel, standing 82 feet, 25 meters tall, carrying its record-breaking load could extract 17 soldiers. That's assuming they're all 200 pounds and carrying 90 pounds of gear. It would take a Saturn V to extract a small platoon from Earth. There are better ways to get people off of mass objects, but they require time to set up. Could a skyhook deploy quickly? Maybe, but a skyhook would be a big target and need planes to fly soldiers up to it. Okay. How do I put this politely? And I do want to be polite, because this is an earnest comment, and I don't want to come across as rude. But this is in the Stargate universe. We're analysing a ship in the Stargate universe, where they have, as said, transporters, where they have rings, which are a transportation system, and where they could have shuttles if they actually fitted them. Puddle jumpers are ones they have available from Atlantis, and so are the ones I focused on, primarily because they're small and efficient. The cargo ship is another viable system, but that would land a far larger group of personnel. So, here's my response. In the Stargate universe, they have both Asgardian beam technology and Lantean ring technology to transport groups up and down, as well as shuttles. Plus, I think for the scale of planetary invasion, you are right. However, for smaller operations, support of allies, dealing with 100 to 1,000 enemy personnel, securing an installation on a moon or an asteroid, which you need to take for intelligence gathering purposes, then those troops will be really useful. Space-based troop usages will be as broad as amphibious operations, with even less likelihood of you having the time to deploy another vessel. So everything short of a full invasion that will be necessary, a reinforced company supported by the firepower of the ship they launch from, or half a battalion, should probably be enough. I would probably say half a battalion. That's a couple of companies plus some support units. So probably ends up... It would probably end up being equivalent to 2.5 companies in strength once you've got the support, i.e. the extra fire support and also those sort of things, and reconnaissance assets. Troops are about providing options. They are about providing security aboard ship. In fact, you might even split it so you have one company who specialise in going down and one company who specialise in ship security, and the fact is the ship security company can also back up the company on the ground if they need to, because they have the training, they just don't specialise in it, and the company which specialises in going down to the ground can back up the ship security company if they need to. But, you know, they can sort of they can have a primary role of one and primary role of the other. It makes sense. Or you have them all do everything, which probably is easier. The troops are about providing options. They're about providing security aboard ship, personnel that specialise in hostile boarding for ship operations when that is needed, and as said, for participating in a whole range of tasks below that of a full planetary invasion. This could include the token, but diplomatically incredibly important gesture of deploying them to support an ally at risk of full invasion, i.e. you land some troops. We have some troops on our allied planet. They might be only a couple of hundred, but we have some troops there. It's a visible sign, it's a token, it's a tripwire. But if you think how often we do that now in Earth politics and Earth international relations, it's a factor of signalling that you cannot ignore. So it's something which they've got to be able to do. In universe, hattacks are often used by the Guard for such invasions, although it does tend to involve 3 to 4 landing, with more staying in space and support. Using technological superiority and fear to make up for the fact that they rarely bring more than 20,000 troops to the operation. That's my own estimate based on their deployments and their tentative strengths. Lanteans had city ships, like Atlantis, which would probably equate to bringing an entire military-industrial complex with them, but I doubt they ever used them as that, mainly because of the way they lost the war. Why? Because the dirty little secret of a planetary invasion is once you control the space around the planet, you can then bombard it back to the Stone Age before you deploy your forces. Still, my version of them would not be doing that task alone, and probably specialist ships with more troops would be needed. As for the size of the spaceships, there are freedoms in space we don't enjoy on Earth, but elevators are already a fairly common thing on ships. There are already fairly common to include elevators on ships. Cruise ships often have elevators. Even some warships have elevators, and if we consider elevators in terms of aircraft carriers, have been around for a long time. Admittedly, those are mainly for moving fighters around, but they're also moving ammunition, etc., from point A to point B in the ship. It's not anything new. Plus, there is the reality that stores are going to take up a lot of space. Fuel, food, supplies, whilst engineering in terms of engines will take up a large chunk of space, you also need the space for any manufacturing that will include on board, i.e. the ability to produce new rounds and round guns, spare parts, hull plating, and possibly even missile components. This is before we get on to weapons, sensors, and all the facilities needed to keep a crew of probably 1,000 plus, depending upon whether it's a flagship as well, on task and happy for months on end in space. Of course, there is the option for distributing these capabilities over a fleet of smaller ships, but then that means multiple engines, multiple fuel supplies, and possibly the whole force being forced to turn back due to loss of one critical ship, because the odds are you won't get more than one of each type of vessel. And then you've got to deploy an entire task group, and that's also a problem, because if you turn up with one big ship, it's a big ship, it's big and scary, it's a status symbol, but it's only one ship. If every time you turn up, you have to turn up in a small flotilla, that looks more threatening. Even if the reality is you do turn up with 2 ships and one hangs back, that still looks a lot less threatening than you turning up with a dozen ships and one coming forward and 11 hanging back. The other option is a small fleet of self-sufficient ships, preferably operating in pairs, but when numbers are few, probably solo. where the loss of one ship, whilst undesirable and not without an impact, would not on its own prevent the force from accomplishing its mission. That's the point, really. Gunner 49. 200 sound like a shift crew, so 600 for a minimum full crew. Christopher, regards the crew, an important consideration is how much do you trust your internal sense and automation. With a reasonable level of paranoia, I'd assume you want at least one dude awake and on duty in any manned airtight compartment to, if nothing else, ensure there's no environmental life support defects that cause a significant portion of the crew to die in their sleep. Yeah. Nathan Brown, I don't follow science fiction closely, so I'm going to go with a classic, the Imperator class from Star Wars. They're called destroyers, but you never see them screening a battle line against torpedo boat analogs, so that's a lie. They act like ships of the line in ROTJ, Return of the Jedi, but there's no way you send a battle squadron to perform a presence mission at a force-cursed sandpit like Tatooine, or to chase fast armed merchantmen. Everything they do except the fleet battle in Return of the Jedi is something you described as a cruise mission. True. Hugh Fisher. In Babylon 5, I'd say the White Stars are the closest to the classic Dr. Clarke cruiser. White Stars plural, not when there is just one of them. Against the Shadows and Vorlons, the White Stars carry out reconnaissance to find the enemy fleet in a probing attack to destroy Vorlon observation posts. In the big battles, the White Stars back up the smaller ships ahead of the main battle line, like World War I, World War II destroyer leaders. The one time a White Star force goes up against enemy capital ships is when Avonova takes on the new Earth Shadow Watch Omegas. She's right to do so, as she has the most experienced crews and the ships best suited to take them on, but even so the White Star cruisers take a pounding from the enemy battleships, being frequently one-shot killed while the White Stars have to combine to take down one Omega. In Season 5, the Alliance is mostly at peace, and we see the White Stars being dispatched on presence missions and tripwire force around the defenseless planet. Anytime something weird happens that might be dangerous, a White Star turns up first. There are other cruiser-sized ships in Babylon 5 that qualify. The Air Force Hyperions are called cruisers, and they're about the right size compared to the battleship Dreadnoughts, Novas and Omegas. In battle, their role seems more as escorts for the capitals. Drazi Warbirds and Sunhawks are also cruiser-sized and use escorts. Small ships back up battles, but that seems to mean more that the Drazi don't have anything bigger anyway. Spolscope. While I generally agree in general, one major drawback I'd highlight for the White Stars in cruiser role is endurance given their small crew complement. With the given complement of 24 to 50 and somewhat Spartan conditions, I'd really struggle to see them being able to stay on station and maintain a presence for long without a nearby friendly base to help. The Hyperions I think are a pretty good example. It's a decent combatant in its own right, but still cheaper than the Omegas or Novas. We also often see them being used like cruisers quite a bit. In wartime scenarios, they usually either escorts for the major combatants, providing supporting fire, or acting as lead ship in a patrol group. In peace, we see them keeping up the patrols and generally acting as the first ship to arrive whenever the Earth Alliance wants to make a point. For example, the first time we see a Hyperion is when one turns up to stake a claim onto the Great Machine. It's interesting. Hannes Park, you probably haven't seen it, but a discussion of the SDF-1 Macross will be entertaining. I'll have to look it up. I've still got an hour left, so apologies if this is answered later. Would your contingent rings also be the defence against boarding actions? We've seen the rings used to put combatants and saboteurs on the ships time and time again. It's been done by every side that had them. Yes! It would be sensible. Actually, one of the things I can understand about the ring compartments is the rings come up, boom, 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 and it's straight onto a hallway. Straight onto a hallway! I know that makes great and easy access for you getting in them, and great for your views in terms of your camera arcing, but have a door! Have a frigging door! Have it off the corridor in a room with a door that you can lock, so people come up, boom, 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 and then they have to get in, and they find that there's a key being turned. Have a door. And have it guarded by a sentry. So if rings have been activated, someone's coming aboard through the rings. Okay. Well, for starters, we have cameras and things watching the space, so that will flash up on the security station, a nice image of what's going on in the ring room. And there's also already a pair of Marines outside. And maybe some internal sentry defences as well that can pop down a turret that can sort of come down from the ceiling and fire some sort of EMP or disabling beam. Something. They have them in this universe. The reason I want the EMP disabling beam is if it's a frigating replicator coming aboard. Jack Ray, Stargate's my favourite sci-fi. By the way, a Discord DM alert, 58 minutes and 55 seconds came through on the audio. Yeah, I'm working on Discord. Come Gasford, Air Force operated vessels with submarine-like tasks. I just wonder which armed forces of Russia and China took over the vessels. The glimpse of the Russian SG team wearing sailor striped shirt is no help, since air mobile powers and even land forces wear it for historical reasons. But the Russians' SG teams and their possible technological findings of reverse engineering development feats might explain Russian BC-304s. I guess the vessels in their original form lack two important weapon systems. A true 40mm railgun. Turreted ones, judging from the muzzle, are pistol or rifle caliber guns. Even considering that slugs do lead, well, considering the size of them, I'm thinking they're probably 40mm. And they need casing propellant, maybe even a keel-mounted pair with a several dozen metre long rail. Batteries are AMRAAM-style missiles used by the F-302s. Kingsrook. My issue with the video is that, one, you are using the books, which, while authorised by MGM, are much beta canon as best. Two, Memory Delta, which is just fan fiction and therefore not a reliable source of future events. Three, you didn't acknowledge that they were using either of these sources. The list of ships has Memory Delta at its top in its title. Alright. Let me just check. Yeah. Kingsrow, my apologies. I did not see it. It got covered up in the subtitles. No worries. Life happens. I was worried that that bit had joined the lost 41 seconds. Yes, the video did lose about 41, and later on checking back about 51 seconds in upload, which included the section where I discussed the various sources I used. I should have discussed it twice. I'm sorry, that's on me, and I should have noticed that had gone. Krishna, I'm a bit disappointed you didn't have a line drawing of a DSC-001 Avalon mixed in with real-life carriers, considering how often you refer to that series of books. Finding a decent one stopped that plan. Christopher. True, all you really get is a description of the rough shape, but in one of the books you have the main character complaining about how inaccurate the universe in-scale models of the ships are, well, with all the lumps and bumps in their own place, so the ship's silhouette is presumably much more complex than just a truncated arrowhead. Glyn Stewart, the author of that book, responding, working on a thing. Neither of the cover versions is too far off, to be honest, though the big problem might be that even DSCO-001 is 800 plus meters long. Christopher, to be honest, I'm so used to cover art having minimal, if any, relation to any character or vehicle in the book, I barely glanced at the cover. Dark Lord Ajax, hello. Personally, I don't think that the BC-304 were designed as battlecruisers, despite being called battlecruisers. The US Air Force was running the design program, and I think they designed it more as a heavy bomber. Optimal operation would be a long-range strike mission with overwhelming firepower, followed by an immediate return to base. Maintenance and resupplies handled at the base. My argument for this is the speed, capable of crossing Milky Way in hours, low crew number, roughly 200, and a big Alpha strike, 16 enhanced nukes. The idea is that Earth and hopefully later Alpha Site function as the space bases of BC-304. After they were built, I think they ended up in the cruiser carrier because that is what was required. I think the concept to start with was a reaction force build of heavy bomber strike craft. That would explain so much. That would really explain so much. Michael Cooch. 2 minutes 20. You comment about we want to procure 18 cruisers and they procure 18 cruisers. Didn't always work that way. We want 8 and we won't wait. The Admiralty originally asked for 6 ships. The politicians held them to 4 on economic grounds, and it wasn't until there was a public pressure they got 8. It wasn't actually the public pressure. Basically, the public pressure and the campaign that was going on meant that they agreed there'd be 4, with 4 more if the Germans laid down a certain number of ships. The Germans laid down those ships so that they got 8. The politicians had won. They'd held them to 4. That was part of the government decisions. Monmouth-class armour cruisers. They got the numbers, but part of the reason behind the design was to keep the costs down. So your statement, whilst possibly generally true, wasn't an absolute. Even pre-World War I, cost counting was an influence. It was the Treasury, not the politicians, which tried to helm the 4 battleships, and it's probably what it succeeded. And it was the Treasury which held them on the Monmouth-class cruisers. And even if the politicians, who mostly were trying to avoid getting caught in a crossfire, that's still not industry saying they can't do it. That's other parts of governments disagreeing over your spending, which is a whole different thing. This is the point I'm trying to make. Once government, once the Admiralty has gone to government and gone, we want these and many ships, the government then agrees and goes, this is how many ships we will accept and agree at, and we'll order them. Then industry would, it was up to industry would either build them or they'd find someone else to build them. And they had their own yards at that time as well they could go to. These days, it's almost the industry telling the politicians what they're prepared to build, and then telling the Admiralty and the forces, this is what you're going to get. And it's the wrong way round. Maguch, railgun ammo. Your figures are based on hours of continuous fire. Realistically, would the railguns be firing continuous? If not, then the ammo would last longer. That might allow them to skip on ammo mags as a compromise, using the space freed up to fit something else. It would seem strange to me to rely on the fact that, no, the enemy are only going to sporadically attack us. It's one of those things. So, I can see your point, but that sounds to me like the people who tried to make that point, and have tried to make it several times, for NATO war stocks, and are currently looking at Ukraine and the expenditure of missiles and other weapons in Ukraine and going, well, we're not sure why they're roughly 3 times the amount we thought they'd be. Well, that's because you thought they'd only be fighting for this long and any day because the enemy would withdraw, not the fighting would be continuous. Never presume the enemy's going to give you a break, basically. I can see your point, and it sounds like a lovely point to make, and it's a lovely point in theory. In practice, never presume you, and never make anything on the assumption. If the enemy then does give you those 3 times, that's great. Your weapons will fire longer, you'll have ammunition for longer. But if they don't, and you've designed it for that, you will then have ammunition for a lot less time. Michael Cooch, 1 out of 12. Why would you load something less than a Mark 9? Because sometimes we don't want that much megadef. We might want to take out a planet-based target without crushing the planet. Crush the planet. No, I do understand your point, but also the fact is the Mark 9 is never really considered that good. Joe, regarding bridge, there is a few shots in Atlantis that clearly show it being at the neck of the ship. The shot from one of the movies, from I forget which one, that showed General Landry looking out from a deck on the far superstructure doesn't actually make clear that he's on the ship's bridge. At least I recall if correctly it is. I think it's the one where they are dealing with the Ori in that movie. But if we go to... Well, I've always thought the bridge structure is this structure, sort of, you can see it just in front of the big sort of aft structure on the top, sort of halfway along the mist, just behind the missiles. That would seem to me where the bridge is. That's where I've always thought it to be, but I could be wrong. Colonel Overkill, the nice thing... Oh, actually no, Joel. I missed your second comment almost. I remember seeing a video ages ago, and I can't find now, where the actual original 3D model was showcased, and I think it was modeled around 600 meters. At least, at the very least, it was more than 200. That's actually where the stats come from, I think. These ones at 650 meters, and that was it. That's what it's sort of based on for that model. Colonel Overkill, the nice thing about railgun arming, assuming you have production capabilities, just snag a few metallic asteroids, and presto, you have materials for more ammo production. That's always good, yes. But again, while you're doing that, you're going to want to have fighters up to give you protection while you're doing the difficult stuff with asteroids. John Plate, maybe the crew is so small because the whole Stargate is a secret operation. The more people, the more likely something's going to get a blab. And I don't think they ever had Men in Black technology. They didn't, but I also think that there is a practical limitation to what you can do in terms of crew. And if you have a small crew, too small a crew, and I'd say this level is way too small, as they currently put them in, and say it is, you're going to end up getting people killed because of it. Petrock01, I always felt like the number of fighters they carried seemed oddly small. And Kai Anderson, the video is great, thank you Dr. Clarke. Thank you everyone for commenting, hope you enjoyed. Thank you for your support of the channel. It wouldn't be possible to do everything I do without your support. And that's becoming more and more obvious as time goes on, and as I talk to more and more colleagues who are in similar cases as I am at the moment. Thank you. Thank you. And so, question. And this one's going to be sort of interesting one. We've covered cruisers. We've talked about fighters. We've talked about carriers. Battleships, battlecruisers. In the modern current version, and by the way, if you can hear something tanking up, that is the fluffy research assistant. Currently he's found the water bottle and is going, Papa's almost at the end of recording. It's time for me to go out, so I'm going to tank up first. If you're looking at modern frigates which are sort of these lighter, general-purpose assets to an extent, but anti-submarine warfare focused, so they have a primary role. But they still are general-purpose assets. Give me an example from science fiction, and this is television-based one, so I can find pictures of them, of frigates in science fiction. And if you do want to use book ones, I won't object, but please can it be ones which you can find a picture for. So, and preferably put a link to the picture in, so I can get an idea for asking this, but I'm not going to reveal it next year. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching to the end. Take care.